there was a time in Nigeria that history wasn't even being taught. I don't know if things have changed, but my mum was actually teaching in Nigeria and she told me that they removed history.
That's why I started the basic Nigerian history on the Running Spirit channel.
Exactly, because the thing is that historical amnesia, what I think it creates is, again, this gaping hole where people are like, this is the experience, but I don't understand why we're having this experience, right? It creates this gaping hole where even the history of how Nigeria got created, the Civil War, there's so many things even within like recent history that have happened that has created this tension, right? And I think maybe the way the Nigerian government dealt with it is like, let's just take it out so that people just don't care about it. But actually what you've done is not allow people to understand who they are. And I think as Nigerians, people know a lot about, let's say, you know, we'll talk about ethnicity, right? Yoruba, Hausa, but the concept of Nigerianness is still new. If you think about our grandparents might have lived in a time, or great grandparents, where Nigeria didn't actually exist.
Yeah.
I think when Nigeria came about, first of all, it was like the Northern and Southern Protectorate, right? It wasn't I think it was in 1914 that they made it Nigeria, right? So again, that's just over 100 years ago.
Definitely my grandparents, when they were alive, there was no Nigeria.
Exactly. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the concept of a state, you need to create that in citizens, that actually we are one state and doing, you know, being educated within this state and you will get something in return and we will, you know, that concept that we are united, I don't think is definitely not there, and is definitely not in the consciousness. People are still, as you said, still very tribalistic, feel everybody for their own. And I do think that impacts the ability for people to see, yes, there's the political issues, but also people to see themselves as a united front. If that makes sense, that actually by helping the country, we're all helping each other, we're all making this country better. And again, we were, unfortunately, Nigerians or people who were in this region, we did not get a say if they wanted to be if they wanted to be together in the same country. So I think the anger and the frustration and the forcefulness of that is still reverberating today, because we didn't as a people get a voice to decide if that was for us.
I mean, the Yoruba people are a great example because half of us are in Nigeria, but I think a large percentage of us is also in the country next door. Yeah, they just split the Yoruba empire in the middle and be like, you guys going to go over there, you guys going to go over here. That's why we have people in Benin speaking Yoruba. I'm like, what, you're Yoruba? What? And like, but you're not Nigerian? And based on what I'm seeing from even this Western countries, maybe their approach is not exactly the best. So maybe we even need to rethink the way we look at power structures and the way we look at running our own communities. Maybe we need to decentralize power more and allow people to have more of a say in their lives. And these African countries might be a great way to try these things out, because obviously we haven't really cemented a particular approach. We are all pretty new. We don't necessarily have to do it the same way the white people do.
You're right. You just reminded me, even when you look at the UK, the concept of union is still contentious. I mean, things are better, but it's still contentious. And I love learning about history. And when you look at, like, even within England, within the United Kingdom, as they say, the island, like, only just in the 90s did they actually kind of sort out the whole, you know, Northern Ireland and all of that. And there was fighting for years, you know, Scotland. So even if you look at British history, it wasn't just people just think, oh, it's all Great Britain. No, there was a lot of contention that why would Westminster down south make decisions about what we are going through in our regions? And actually they have different languages and they have different cultures, even within this so-called Great Britain. So I think, as you said, us looking at the West and thinking, oh, this is the best way to do things. Really the best way to do things, because what a lot of the times it still creates inequality. There's still, even within the UK, we've got a north-south divide of it, we've got this and that. You still create inequalities where some groups or some regions get more than others, right? And I like what you said about decentralizing power, looking at things from a different model rather than just trying to replicate things, because it hasn't necessarily, it's taken a long time. I was reading something the other day where they were talking about, for example, for a long time, people would never describe themselves like as British. People would describe themselves as Scottish and English, and there was a lot of tension between those groups. They didn't see themselves as one. So why do we expect a country as big as Nigeria, that is way bigger than Great Britain by landmass? Why do we expect everybody to just get along with over 200 plus ethnic groups? But yeah.
And it's not only that it took them a long time, the Western world, to get to this level, but even now that they're at this level, look at the US, they're extremely divided. It's not really working, but they were only able to do it because they had the capitalistic approach of exploiting the global South. So they could do this model and make it work and everything, but people didn't really have to, whenever things got, they could always flood the market with money and they were rich. It's easy to put up with certain things when your country is wealthy and you have all those resources to extract from. We are not going to have the same thing unless we want to do to them what they did to us. We're not going to have that whole backup of wealth. So to try to copy the model that they did, which is not even the best, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't like the fact that when people talk about how we can improve and the structures that we can put in place, I don't like the fact that we always want to copy what the Western world are doing, because it's probably not going to work for us. We probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah, you're right.
Designed to serve them, isn't it? Even our education system, what did we learn in history and how much was left out in terms of our schooling, and what difference that would make if we actually learned that things were happening, maybe not in the West because it was the Dark Ages or whatever. There's not just this big chunk of no history.
Definitely. That is really interesting because it even makes me think about, like, for example, the Middle East and things like that. And I mean, there's so many, I don't know too much about in terms of the politics, but as an observer, I know in their system, for example, they have a lot of laborers from, for example, Pakistan and India and different things, Malaysia and even East Africa that come over and do different laborer jobs and do different menial jobs. And they have to create a class system, right?
Yeah, hierarchy.
Exactly. And those people will not have any right to citizenship. Sometimes they don't even have a right to keep their own passport. The kafala system, their passport is taken away from them from the minute they enter the country. So as you said, if we really want to think about things, are we just thinking of recreating other systems of oppression, or are we thinking about creating something new and something collectivist and something that is actually empowering for people in general? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh my God. All right, let's do the conclusion. We've had an amazing conversation. We've talked about so many things, but we always try to end it on a positive note in something that can give the people that are listening agency. We usually ask questions about what can be done to solve some of these issues that we've discussed and what can people do.
If there is one piece of advice or wisdom you can share with Black individuals in the diaspora, what would it be in order for them to empower themselves so that it will cause a ripple effect and empower others too?
Okay. I'll start off with, there's a quote by Steve Biko. I think he was an apartheid activist in South Africa. And he said something along the lines of, the most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And for me, there's so many things we can talk about when we talk about the state of Africa and the state of things right now. And there's so many angles. But I think our mindset and believing that we are people, that we deserve goodness as well, and we are not intellectually deficient, we can do well, you know, even just as individuals, empowering ourselves, I think is so important. And yes, there are a lot of negative things and bad things that are happening, but we have to try and always counterbalance that also with the good. And I think that's something that, as someone from the diaspora, sometimes a lot of people grow up only hearing negative things about Africa, only hearing negative things, and it affects our psyche and it affects who we are. So I think what I would say is being intentional in what we choose to absorb as well, being intentional in the stories that we hear, being intentional in the literature that we feed ourselves, and not just, yes, we know that the political situation and keeping aware of the political situation is really important, but I think a massive thing we've spoken about today again and again is that recovery of historical memory, of taking away this historical amnesia. We're like, okay, this and this is going on, but this is, and it might seem like, yeah, one is repeating themselves, but it's so important, because if we don't say why these things are the way they are, then it just seems like, oh, it's just bad luck, or we're just not as good, or this and that. Actually, no, there's been a systemic reason for why things are the way they are. And I think that in itself, for me anyway, has really helped to ground me and understand on a personal level, ground my self-esteem and my sense of self, but also on a global level. Hopefully what, you know, Africa can succeed and Africa can do is not a deficiency personally, if that makes sense, the way I see it. Even like in a psychology lens, not seeing the kind of disorder as just being in the individual, seeing the disorder as societal and structural, right? Because that makes a difference in how someone could go from either a level of internalized self-hate to having righteous anger and righteous frustration at the systems. Yeah. And that can have a big impact just on our psyche and our minds.
Amazing. Thank you so
very
much.
Powerful words of wisdom. It resonated a lot as a psychologist too, and just as a person of the global majority. Yeah, I hope the listeners enjoy this conversation as much as we have.
Yeah, I want to reiterate it. The advice is to be intentional in what we choose to absorb, in the literature that we take in. Doesn't have to be literature, just the knowledge that we take in. Making sure that we learn why things are the way they are whilst being aware of the current political situation. So I think you're saying the first step is just to be aware. We need to be aware. And in order to be aware, we need knowledge, because knowledge about the past and knowledge about the current political situation. I guess we just have to find a way to make it easy for people to get that knowledge.
So one other thing I would add is, I guess, part of what you're doing as well. I think the third step to that, to me, is coming together as a collective, because I think we do have power in numbers. The biggest thing sometimes is believing we have no power to do anything, right? And I think coming together and moving away from that individualistic mentality and coming together as people of the global majority and having these conversations or doing different projects together and connecting with people and talking with people, there's so much power in that. And I think if we believe we don't have any power to change anything, we're not going to do anything, if that makes sense. Yeah, we have to believe that we have power.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much, Kalfa. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been lovely having you on.
It's been lovely chatting with you guys.